Everyone told me that self-respect was the foundation of a healthy love, so I built a wall and called it a home. I believed that setting boundaries meant protecting my energy from those who did not know how to handle it well. My rules were simple and clear, designed to keep me safe from the messy demands of someone else's heavy needs. When he asked for more time or a deeper connection, I calmly reminded him that my space was non-negotiable now. It felt empowering at first to say no without guilt. Watching him step back and try to respect the lines I drew, I convinced myself that his confusion was just a lack of maturity, something he had to fix within his spirit. There is a very thin line between protecting your peace and weaponizing your silence against those who love you. I used the language of therapy to justify every cold shoulder and every door I shut when things got difficult. He would sit on the edge of our bed, looking at me with eyes that begged for a bridge instead of another wall. I would just sip my tea and tell him that I was not responsible for his feelings of abandonment or his anxiety. To me, it was a triumph of the self, a way to ensure that I would never be the one who lost control of us today. I viewed his vulnerability as a threat to my independence, a slow leak in the perfect vessel I had created then. Every time he reached out, I stepped back, framing it as a necessary distance to maintain my internal calm now. The more he tried to understand my silence, the more I used it as a shield, convincing myself he was the problem. I told my friends I was finally standing up for myself, and they cheered for a strength that was actually hollow. We confuse isolation with independence so often that we forget how to be human in the presence of a real heart. He began to shrink, his voice becoming a whisper, as if he was afraid to disturb the sterile peace of my space. I watched him fade and felt a twisted sense of pride, thinking I had finally mastered the art of detachment. But the quiet in our house started to feel less like a choice and more like a sentence I forced him to serve. I realized that my boundaries were not bridges to understanding, but weapons I used to keep him at a distance. Every time he tried to share his pain, I labeled it as trauma dumping, just to avoid the heavy weight of reality. I was an architect of isolation, crafting complex rules that made it impossible for him to ever truly reach me. He would ask for a simple hug, and I would talk about bodily autonomy while ignoring the coldness in my heart. I felt superior in my refusal to be moved, as if my lack of empathy was a sign of a highly evolved mental state. I would watch him walk on eggshells, afraid to breathe too loudly in the presence of my strict emotional regime. He stopped bringing me flowers because I told him they were a burden to maintain, a chore disguised as a gift. I saw his effort as a nuisance, a desperate attempt to manipulate my feelings when I was just trying to be free. My freedom felt like a desert, vast and empty, but I refused to admit that I was thirsting for his lost warmth. We sat in silence during dinner, the clinking of forks against ceramic, the only sound in our suffocating home. I told myself that this was peace, that this was what a mature relationship looked like when drama was removed. But drama is often just the sound of two souls trying to collide, and I had effectively silenced his soul now. I monitored his responses, waiting for a slip-up so I could point to it and justify my need for even more space. My love was a series of conditions, a contract that he signed without realizing there was no room for growth. He was losing his spark, the bright light in his eyes dimming under the pressure of my constant clinical tests. I ignored the way his shoulders slumped when I walked into a room, a sign of defeat I mistook for deep respect. I was so focused on being right that I did not care if I was being kind, as if kindness was a weakness of old. My therapists had taught me to advocate for myself, but they never told me how to keep from being a tyrant. I was ruling over a kingdom of one, standing tall on a mountain of rules, while the man I loved froze below. The power I felt was addictive, a cold rush of control that masked the terrifying loneliness that crept in now. One evening, the silence changed from a peaceful refuge into a heavy fog that I could no longer breathe in. He sat across from me at the table, his eyes no longer searching mine for a flicker of warmth or recognition. I had told him that my Tuesday nights were for solitude, a rule he followed with a terrifying precision now. When he got the news about his father's illness, he did not come to me. He just sat in his car for many hours. I found out through a text he sent to a friend, and the realization of my exclusion felt like a sharp blade. I asked why he did not tell me, and he simply said that he did not want to disturb my curated emotional balance. Hearing my own logic used against me was a bitter pill that I was forced to swallow in the cold kitchen light. I reached for his hand, but he gently pulled away, citing my frequent lectures on personal physical space now. The irony was a suffocating weight, a cage I had built with my own hands that was now locking me out of him. I had won the struggle for my independence, but the prize was a hollow house filled with the echoes of my ego. He began to live a life parallel to mine, a ghost who shared a zip code but no longer shared his inner world. I missed the way he used to interrupt my thoughts with silly questions that I used to find so deeply annoying. Now, those interruptions were replaced by a professional politeness that felt more violent than any argument. I tried to initiate a real conversation about us, but he just smiled and said he was respecting my many limits. It turns out that when you tell someone they are too much for you, they eventually decide to become nothing. I watched him pack a small bag for a weekend trip he had not mentioned, and I felt the first real sting of fear. My authority was crumbling because he no longer cared to challenge it. He had simply checked out of our life. The power I held was useless when there was no one left who wanted to fight for a place in my crowded heart. I realized that my boundaries were never about health. They were about avoiding the risk of being truly seen. I was finally alone in the way I always claimed to want, and it was the most painful thing I had ever felt now. I stood in the hallway watching him zip his suitcase, the sound echoing like a final verdict in my empty mind. The reflection in the mirror showed a woman who had optimized her life but completely deleted her humanity now. My ego was a tower of glass that I had polished daily, ignoring the fact that it was freezing everyone out. I tried to find a valid reason to stop him, but all my previous logic now felt like a very cruel script today. It is terrifying to realize that the person you were avoiding was actually your only true source of light. I had treated his love like a cold transaction where I was the only one allowed to set the market price now. Every boundary I set was just a fancy word for a rejection. I was too cowardly to deliver in a direct way today. I looked at my old journals, filled with self-care quotes that now looked like instructions for a lonely end. The realization hit me hard that I was not setting standards. I was just punishing him for wanting closeness. I had used the modern language of healing to mask the ancient and ugly reality of my own cold selfishness now. He did not look angry or even sad anymore. He just looked relieved to finally be escaping my emotional grip. I wanted to scream that I was sorry, but my throat felt tightened by the very rules I had spent years creating. My pride told me to stay silent and maintain my dignity, while my soul screamed for me to fall to my knees. Now, I saw how much effort it took for him to stop caring. A slow erosion caused by my constant wall of silence now. I was a master of the exit strategy, always keeping one foot out the door while demanding his absolute devotion. It was not about safety or mental health. It was about the intoxicating power of holding a heart hostage today. The silence between us was no longer a peaceful sanctuary but a graveyard for the many things never said today. I had dismantled his confidence brick by brick, calling it accountability when it was actually just cruelty. My internal narrative of being a strong woman was dying, replaced by the truth of being a lonely narcissist. I reached out to touch his arm, but the air between us felt like a thick wall of lead I could never penetrate. He walked to the door and did not look back, leaving me with the cold perfection of my own empty home tonight. I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the engine of his car fade into the night silence. Now, the boundaries I was so proud of were now the bars of a cage that I had built around my own lonely spirit now. I checked my phone, hoping for a text that would never come because I had trained him to stop reaching out. The safe space I created was actually a vacuum where no love could survive the constant lack of oxygen now. I realized that I did not want respect as much as I wanted absolute and total control over his good heart now. Now, the house is always clean, and the schedule is always followed, but the air is thick with heavy regret. I see photos of us from years ago and I do not recognize the woman who still knew how to let a person in today. I am the hero of my own story in my head, but I am the villain in the life of the only person who loved me. People congratulate me on my strength and high standards, never knowing the cost of this dark victory today. I have my peace now, but it is a graveyard peace where nothing grows and no birds ever sing in the morning. Every time I try to set a new boundary with someone else, I feel a sharp hang of the cruelty I practiced then. I am a ghost in my own apartment, haunted by the memories of a warmth I traded for moral superiority now. You cannot heal a heart by cutting it off from the world. You only turn it into a stone that can no longer feel. He found someone else who does not treat intimacy like a crime or a violation of a strict personal space. Now, I watched them from a distance, seeing him laugh in a way he never could when he was living under my many rules. The silence between us is finally complete, a permanent monument to a love I killed with my own pride tonight. I called it boundaries because I was too afraid to admit that I was just being a cruel and heartless person.